فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب.
الحمد لله وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. And so today we're going to pick up where we left off in the fourth major chapter of Durrat al-bayan في usool al-imaan by Dr. Mohamed yousri, which is the book that we're studying in Aqeedah. And in this chapter, we've been talking about how we take information as Muslims, and as where does al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah, where do they get their information? And here's some other, like today we're going to talk about a very, very important subject, which comes into what do we do when there's differences in how we understand the information that we've taken, like from the Quran and the Sunnah, and how do we deal with these differences, and what are some key concepts to understand when we're calling to Allah and when we're calling people to follow the Quran and the Sunnah, because sometimes there will be differences of opinion that either they're very, very like major differences, or there's something that, you know, it's understandable difference. And some of this will take like, and definitely it would take like a lot of classes to go into like the details of this, but I'll try to do in this this class, I'll try to bring them together, some of the basic principles, and give some examples with these principles of how we deal with these differences of opinion. And the author here, he's going to give us some major principles that we can look at to see how do we know if this is something that is, you know, it's a small area of difference of opinion, or if it's something that's a major difference of opinion that requires a major response. And so the last thing that we left off was that we talked about that we rely on the wording and terminology of the Quran and the Sunnah when affirming issues of belief and foundations of the religion, and they use them when explaining the meanings of the Sharia according to the language of the Quran and the explanation of the Messenger. So this is what we talked about, making sure that we stick to the terminology that comes from the Quran and the Sunnah, as this will keep us from any like deviance in the way that we understand the Quran and the Sunnah, and that we don't fall away from the way of the righteous predecessors, the Salaf, and how they understood these things. And so the next thing that he says here is the author, he says, وَلَا إِسْمَةَ لِأَحَدٍ بَعْدَ النَّبِيِّ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمَ إِلَّا لِإِجْمَاعِ الْأُمَّةِ إِذَا انْعَقَدَ وَلَيْسَ لِأَحَدِهِمْ أو لَيْسَ لِأَحَدِهَا إِسْمَةٌ. And so he says here that there is no infallibility for anyone after the Prophet ﷺ, except for consensus of the Ummah once it is established. And there's no infallibility for small groups either. And so this is something that is very important for us to understand, especially when we look at the differences of opinion and whatnot, is that we understand that there is nobody that is not subject to making mistakes. And of course, this is an area that al-Sunnah wal Jama'ah, they go against the Shia. Like the Shia, they have their different imams that they said are infallible, and that you have to follow them after this, that, and the other. And they basically made these people out to be infallible. And of course, this is something they have no evidence for. Like there's no proof that some other imams are going to be infallible. But this is something that they came up with, which is a bid'ah. And but we understand that after the Prophet ﷺ, like the Prophet ﷺ, he is the one that received the wahy, the revelation. And if there was anything that he made a judgment in or in whatnot, and his judgment, if it was not the best judgment, and it was in some way lacking, Allah would fix whatever that was, whether it was with revelation from the Quran, or whether it was Jibril coming to him and saying, no, this is or giving him information about this thing that previously he had something that was maybe lacking in that. And there's some examples of this, such as Abasa wa Tawalla, which is that he frowned and turned away. This is the beginning of the Surah Abasa. And so this is the Prophet ﷺ when he was giving da'wah. He was saying that there is an importance to give da'wah to the chiefs of Quraysh and like the people that held power and authority, because this of course is a very good thing to, when you're giving da'wah, to give da'wah to the people that are going to make the biggest change. And so when And when he was giving da'wah to these people, one of the blind Sahabi came to him, and and the Prophet ﷺ, instead of taking him, instead of turning to him and helping him with his question that he came to him to ask and get an answer about, he focused on the chief Sahabi, and this was from his ijtihad. The Prophet ﷺ saw that this was a seeming greater good, and so Allah revealed this to him, that he frowned and turned away, and that this was something that it was better for him to focus on the believer, and that was maybe seemingly lowly in the sight of mankind, but with Allah, of course, this believer is much greater than the chiefs of Quraysh. And so this is something that Allah fixed. What was something that was lacking with the Prophet ﷺ. And of course, this is not something that was like a sin that the Prophet ﷺ did, but rather it was something that he chose between two things, and saw that one of them was better, but actually the other thing was the better thing, and that Allah showed this. And this is also there's a couple other examples where Allah brought up a better option when there was two options, and the Prophet ﷺ, he chose one, and Allah showed him that this was the better option. And there's also an example where occasionally the Prophet ﷺ, he would tell someone something, and then he would call them back and tell them that Jibreel came to him or something of this sort, and actually said this. And it wasn't that it was something that was like an actual disagreement between it, but it was something that was better, or something that was clarifying, or it was something that was that would give specificity to the situation that the Prophet ﷺ didn't have at that time, but after he got the revelation, he went with what was revealed to him. So of course, this is something that with the Prophet ﷺ, he was something that Allah would fix any mistakes. If there was any mistakes, Allah would have fixed it with that. And so, of course, Allah completed his religion, and so there's no mistakes in that. And so we can trust whatever comes from the Prophet ﷺ as being infallible, and as opposed to anyone after him, because no one after the Prophet ﷺ is going to be infallible. And like the best of the ummah, which is like Abu Bakr, even him in his khilafah and whatnot, of course this was an area where he had to get people's opinion, and he also had to look into the Quran, the Sunnah and whatnot, and come to agreement, but it wasn't something that he was infallible in this. And he's a man, even though he's the best of the ummah after best of mankind after the prophets, he's still a man, and this is something that all men are subject to mistakes in that. And so we hold this is a very key point that we hold to that. And then he makes the exception, the author here, he says إِلَّا لِإِجْمَاعِ الْأُمَّةِ إِذًا أَعْقَدَ. And so he says, except for the ijma'. So if in ijma' of the ummah ever happens, so like if there's a consensus of all the scholars in the ummah about a certain issue, in this case, there's isma in this. Like there's an isma in everyone being together on one thing. This is, and the word isma is like the infallibility, or like that he's protected from any like deficiency in that. And so if all of the ummah, or all of the scholars of the ummah, of course, like the layperson doesn't necessarily have a say if they don't know the sharia and whatnot. This refers to the scholars. But if the scholars have a consensus on any certain issue, then after this, like this is something that we know that there's not going to be a mistake in this consensus. We never have to go look back and recheck the consensus. If we know the consensus is there, then this is enough for us, and we know that there's never going to be a mistake in the consensus, because the Prophet ﷺ, he said, "La tajtami'u ummati ala ad-dalal." And so in this hadith that he says that my ummah will never come together on something that's misguidance. And so when he says this, we understand from this that if the ummah ever came together on something, it will never be misguidance. It will always be correct. And this is something that is specific for what we can understand is this is something that is specific for the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And like for Islam, this is something that's specific for this ummah. It's not necessarily something that we have any evidence for the previous ummahs, and we know that they all went astray in this way and that way from like the Yahud and Nasara, and that they were killing their prophets and whatnot, or they were making their prophet out to be God and whatnot. And so even if they came together on this, they don't have this special characteristic that they will never come together on dalal. or something that is misguidance, but rather this is something that is specific to the ummah, the nation the nation that has come from the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so once this happens, like this consensus happens, we know that this is something that is infallible. There's never going to be a mistake with this. And also the last thing that he says here, and وَلَيْسَ لِأَحَدِهَا عِصْمَةٌ. And so he says, and there's not for any individuals or in small groups of them any type of isma as well, which is that is infallibility. And so we can understand from this that regardless of like the greatness of any of the scholars that come after that came after the Prophet ﷺ or came from the Sahaba or the Tabi'in, all of these scholars, every single one of them is going to, he's human, so he's going to come into something that he'll make a mistake here and he'll make a mistake here, or they will never have this type of isma where we don't say that Imam Shafi is someone that you follow 100% in every single thing, and we don't say that the same thing about Abu Hanifa or Imam Ahmed or and these things. We know that what they came with in general is something that is very good, and of course for the layperson, when they don't know something, they ask someone who knows, and they can get the ruling from somebody who knows about that ruling, and they can take that for themselves and act upon that. But that doesn't mean that that person, whoever they're following, is someone who is protected from any mistakes. And this is something that nobody holds this. And occasionally there are groups of people that will hold on to a small groups of scholars and whatnot, or they'll hold on to a group or a bunch here and a bunch here, and they will say that these are the trustworthy scholars, and then they pretty much throw everyone else away. And this is something that, of course, even if you held onto a small group of scholars, this small group of scholars is not going to be someone who's not subject to mistakes. They're not infallible. Even that like small group of trustworthy scholars, these are still going to fall into mistakes here and there. And for someone to hold on to them and think that they're doing the same thing that the Shia did with their imams, which is holding on to a certain amount of imams, and then they base their deen off of that. But rather, we see that if all of the scholars, they come together on something, we know that this is the haqq, and this is the truth. But if there are some differences of opinion, and this, then we know that one of them is right. Like someone in the differences of opinion, one of them is right, and the other ones are forgiven. And this is also a key thing, and we'll talk about the hadith here that comes up with that. And so the next thing the author here says is حفظه he says ويعتقدون أن الإجماع في الأحكام حجة قاطعة وأن الخلاف السائغ موطن للساعة. And so he says here, in that they believe that consensus or ijma' in rulings is an absolute clear evidence, hujjatun qati'ah, and acceptable difference, which is the والخلاف السائغ موطن للساعة, which is like a place of ease, or like that there's openness to do this or that. And so this is something that is very important. So whatever the ummah has come together with consensus, if there's consensus in an issue, this is not a place that anybody has room for any say other than this. It's we hear and we obey, because we know that this is a place that Allah has protected the ummah from making any mistakes in this. So if there is consensus in something, then this is all that we need for us to know that this is the truth, and anything other than this is something that is of course against the truth. And so this is something also that whenever we see ijma', this is not something we should hold at a level that is like somehow below the sunnah or below the Quran and the sunnah, because this is, when it comes to ijma', like, yes, once the ijma' has been established, it's based on evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah, but this is something that it cannot be understood any other way than it is. Like the Quran, maybe you can understand it in multiple ways, but the Sunnah with the Quran, maybe you can understand this in certain ways. But when you have ijma' in an issue, there's no other way that you can understand it, and it's something that is very, very, very clear cut, and it's the strongest of evidences when it comes to not being open to any debate. It cuts out all types of debate in it, because it's the strongest of evidences that you can look at in that way. And yes, the Quran is it's the word of of Allah. But even though this is preserved in that way, this is something that people can talk about it in different ways. Maybe you look at it one way, and maybe you look at it another way. And of course, there are some things in the Quran, of course, you can only see it one way. And this also would take that same level of, this would take that same level of, of hujjah or evidence as ijma'. But this is one of the things about ijma' that makes it separate than everything else, and it's something that's the strongest thing. It's one of the things that holds together the ummah from any type of foul play or anyone trying to change anything in the ummah, and so or in the sharia. And also the next thing he said was, وَأَنَّ الْخِلَافَ السَّائِغ مَوْطِنٌ لِسَاعٍ, and that this is, if there is khilaf al-sa'ig or khilaf al-mu'tabar, these are other words that you would say for that, which is, this is a difference of opinion that is understandable difference, or something that is it's a valid difference of opinion. In this case, this is something that is a place where we don't come in, we don't make any serious issues about this. If this is something that that is a difference of opinion where there's no it takes a lot of ijtihad. We'll talk about ijtihad, which is takes a lot of putting the scholars, they put their mind to use, and they look at the text, and they do their best to come up with the right opinion that they see as right. But yeah, it could be this, or it could be that. This is something that we don't get on anyone's case for this, and he'll talk about that. But this is something that is rather the person, for the individual that's a layperson, he takes the opinion from a scholar that he trusts, and he takes that opinion for himself. And this is something, and if you see someone else took an opinion from another scholar that he trusts, that's in difference to that opinion, then he understands he took his opinion, and both people are doing what they're called on to do. Because Allah says, if you don't know about something, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. And so then you should ask the people of knowledge if you're not someone who knows. So that's all that's required of the layperson. They ask the person of knowledge, and they take that for themselves, and then this is it. But they don't ever get on someone else's case for taking from another scholar when they didn't know. This is something that is open for that. And also this is in some of the things that sometimes people will they'll fall into, and one of the ways that the people of nifaq and bid'ah, that they try to play with the deen, is that they'll try to make people think about ijma', and they'll try to make the ijma' seem to be something that isn't very that's questionable. They try to throw questions and in the shubahat in the matter of ijma', and this is something that for this that is very, very clear, and that anyone who tries to throw issues into ijma', just be aware that this person is someone who's trying to open up the door. He's trying to open up the door for a change in the religion and all of these other things, and this is not something that any of the scholars ever had any disagreement about for ages and ages and ages, and something that they're all together on. And sometimes we'll see this in some of the people that are heavily affected by liberalism, because of course liberalism, they can't change Islam when they know that there's ijma' in an issue. So then they have to look at ijma' and they're this is the thing that's stopping us, so let's look at ijma' and try to bring ijma' itself into question, because if they can do that, then they think that they can open the door to the rest of the change that they want to make in the religion. And of course this is bayan, and we seek Allah's refuge from that. And so the next thing that the author here, he says, حفظه الله, وما اختلف فيه وجب رده إلى الكتاب والسنة مع الاعتذار عن المخطئ من الأمة فلا يعصمون ولا يؤثمون. And so he says that whatever is disagreed upon, then it's obligatory to bring it back to the Quran and the Sunnah, while giving excuses for those imams who made mistakes. And they aren't made out to be infallible, nor are they regarded as sinful in those mistakes. And this is a very, very another very key point to understand. It's because Allah tells us in multiple places in the Quran, وَإِن تَنَازَعْتُمْ فِي شَيْءٍ فَرُدُّوهُ إِلَى اللَّهِ وَالرَّسُولِ. And so this is something that if you come into a disagreement or something, then bring that back to Allah. And so bring it back to Allah and His and the Messenger. And so this is the key thing, and this is what the author here, he's he's pointing to this verse, and there's other verses of the meaning is very, very similar. And so this is something that we always go back to the Quran and the Sunnah when there's any type of difference of opinion. Of course, we don't look to we don't look to like individual scholars or madhabs because they're a madhab and something, but rather we're looking for the Quran and the Sunnah in this matter. And this is what is called upon us in any difference of opinion, to go back to the Quran and the Sunnah in this matter. And if there is any mistake from the imams, then we give them excuses for that. And there's many excuses that we can see that are valid excuses for the imams. And one thing to keep in mind is that the imams and like the scholars of the ummah, they have put their life in dedication to serving Allah and serving the ummah by studying and doing their best. And of course, they're not subject to not making mistakes. Like they're going to make mistakes here and there. And also, if you look at like the Quran, yes, we memorize it, but we forget it as well if we don't keep doing that. And so sometimes there will be someone who says something, and then they forget that there's an ayah in the Quran that is actually in disagreement with what they said. And this is something that even like Umar radiallahu anhu, someone was talking about, he said that there's a certain limit for how much someone gives in the mahr, which would you would call it like the dowry, for the bride, like to give her like so much. And he was saying that you can't give her so much. And then one of the people, they reminded him of the ayah, that if you've given someone a qintar, which is like a huge amount, a huge sum, in dowry, and so don't take anything from it, like if they were if they would have a separation and whatnot. And this is like mentioned in Surah An-Nisa. And so when he was reminded of the ayah, he was like, oh, this is the correct thing. And so, of course, we always bring it back to the Quran and the Sunnah. And also the same thing, there's many examples of the Sahaba at this time when they would look into an issue, they would maybe not see that there was a hadith, because they weren't all around the Prophet ﷺ. Like it's not like Omar was there every single day. Everything that the Prophet ﷺ said, he was there and he was listening and he heard every single thing. If he was there, yes, he would listen, but he also had like duties that he had to do with his life, and he had a life that he had to make sure that he was providing for his family and whatnot. So he would take turns with another person. For example, he would take turns with another person with his job and with listening to the Prophet ﷺ, and then they would share what they had. But there were things that can miss someone, and so even with Abu Bakr, there were certain parts of a hadith, maybe even a sentence from a hadith that the Abu Bakr, he didn't hear, but someone else had heard this sentence, and this would actually be the answer to what he was looking for in an issue. And so this is one of the reasons that scholars will sometimes make mistakes, is because their minds can't fully encompass all of the text at a single moment. If they're looking into an issue, maybe like one or two texts, or like even like a certain wording or phrasing of a certain hadith, they haven't looked into that, so they make a mistake because they haven't seen this certain evidence hasn't come to them yet. Or sometimes the evidence comes to them, but the evidence that came to them, it came to them in a bad way, such as like if it's a hadith, maybe the narrators of the hadith are untrustworthy, but the hadith itself is narrated by other narrators in a sahih or an authentic way, and it comes to them, and they heard, and the other people that took this hadith, they heard it from a correct, chain of narration, and so they say that this is trustworthy the way I heard it. But the way that someone else heard it, they say this is, I can't take this as an evidence because the people that narrated it are not trustworthy. And so this is one of the reasons that you'll have differences of opinion that come up, and because just the hadith maybe reached someone, and maybe it reached the other person as well, but it didn't reach them in an authentic transmission, so they can't take it as evidence. And this is one of the reasons you'll see lots of differences, specifically with like the Hanafi madhab, as opposed to like some of the other madhabs, such as like Imam Ahmed and also Shafi and Maliki. Sometimes the Hanafi madhab, because of the place that they were in, they wouldn't necessarily have certain hadith reach them that were in a way that they could actually take it as an evidence, but rather it was something that was either weak. So the way that Abu Hanifa, that he worked with these hadiths were different than the way that the other scholars, they worked with hadiths, and he was more cautious in the way that he took hadiths. And also in some ways he would also use hadiths that were weak in some sense, because it encompassed something that was also within the Sharia, like a general principle came into the Sharia, so we'd use this in a certain way. This is of course something you'd delve into in usool fiqh, but this shows some of the reasons of why there's differences of opinion. But always we go back to Allah whenever there's a difference of opinion, and we go back to the Prophet ﷺ in this. And of course, like going back to the Prophet ﷺ, what does this look like? This looks like going back to an authentic hadith, whether it's ahad or whether it's something that is mustafid, which is like that's almost mutawatir. It's like a little under mutawatir, or if it's mutawatir. Like all of these, whether it's narrated by a ton of narrators or by a good number or by just a few narrators, all of this we take it if it's authentic, and this is what's encompassed of bringing it back to Allah and His Messenger. And if there are any mistakes that the Imma, like the Imams, have made in the Ummah, then we always try to find an excuse for them. We never try to say that this person is ignorant or this type of nonsense that some of the people that like they learn a little bit about the deen and whatnot, and they start to speak about the deen, and then they look at some of the people that don't agree with them, or like some of the Imams, whether it's Abu Hanifa, or some of them have gotten on the case of Abu Hanifa and some of these issues, and they will speak poorly about him. And this is like one of the greatest scholars of Islam. Like, and so for someone to ever, just because you don't agree with his views and this, that, and the other, this doesn't take away from his huge contribution to Islam, and that he was a great imam, and that he was a very that his fiqh was very, very, very strong. Even if there's difference of opinion between the ai this does not take away from his status as an imam and whatnot. And so we don't go to the extreme of ever saying that this person is that this person's a sinner and whatnot, or jahil, or like someone that's ignorant and whatnot. We never say that about the ummah, but rather we look and say maybe the hadith didn't reach him, maybe he forgot about this evidence, maybe there was a certain type of understanding he had, and this is why he didn't take this hadith and in this way, or he looked at it in a different way. We always try to find an excuse for them. And then he says, the last sentence the author says is فَلَا يُعْصَمُونَ وَلَا يُؤَثَّمُونَ. So we don't make them out to be like, these people aren't made out to be perfect without any mistakes, nor are they regarded as sinful in what they've done. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِذَا حَكَمَ الْحَكِمْ فَأَصَابَ فَلَهُ أَجْرًا وَإِنْ أَخْطَأَ فَلَهُ أَجْرٌ وَاحِدٌ. And so he says that if there was the Prophet ﷺ, he says that if there's a person like a hakim, which is like someone who's a judge, but if he looks into an issue and he comes up with the right hukam, or the right ruling in this issue, then he gets two rewards. And if he makes a mistake, then he only gets one reward. And so from this hadith, this is a very key hadith in understanding this whole concept, which is, one, the person either gets it right or he gets it wrong. This is one thing that we take from the hadith. Another thing, the person who gets it right, he's rewarded. The person who gets it wrong, he's rewarded. He's rewarded for his effort, and he's rewarded for his effort as well as getting it right. And so that's why he gets the two rewards, is because he gets he's like ijtahada, and that he went and he did the ijtihad, which is like the going and exerting his force and exerting his effort and finding whatever the truth is. He did his ijtihad, and so he gets a reward for the ijtihad. He got it right, he gets a reward for getting it right. And then this is the other one. He did his ijtihad, of course, with the right niyyah and whatnot, and so he got one reward. And he also is not held he's not also an atham. He got a reward for what he did. He made a mistake. And of course, if someone was between like either getting it right or getting it wrong, and the person who got it wrong is like a sinner for that, this would bring a big hardship into like studying and seeking knowledge and whatnot, and people would probably leave. There'd probably be people that leave it off just to be safe, and so the Prophet ﷺ giving this incentive to get it right. And also, if you do get it wrong and you put whatever was required of you into it, then this is something, of course, this is for a scholar. But if the scholar put his effort into it and he got it wrong, as long as he did what was required of him, then there's no sin upon him in this. And so we don't say that this person is a sinner or this, that, and the other, that because they made a mistake. And this happens with some of the scholars unknowingly, because of the environment that they're in, they'll fall into some type of bid'ah, such as like Imam al-Nawawi or Ibn Hajar. They fell into some type of ta'wil when it comes to the characteristics of Allah. And this is something, they fell into this, and of course they don't mean anything from this except that they mean good. Like, this is something that comes from them wanting to make sure that there's no deficiency anyone is ascribing to Allah. And so because of this, they would look at some of the sifat, such as Allah's hands, that are mentioned in the Quran and whatnot, and so they would reinterpret it in another way other than its apparent meaning, or the same things as like face or his coming and whatnot. And so these are certain things that they were in an environment of people that were constantly calling, like from the Ash'ari, and whatnot, that were the Ash'aris. They were constantly giving out a certain rhetoric, and so they were encompassed by this. And so they fell into some of these mistakes thinking that they were doing the right thing. And of course, this is something that we make excuses for them, because their contributions to the Ummah are vast, and no one would deny that their contributions to the Ummah were immense, except someone who is ignorant. And there are people that are ignorant that have spread some of this nonsense, like recently on YouTube and whatnot. And of course, this is something that like Ibn Qayyim, he says, إذا بلغ الماء كلتين الماء كلتين فلا يحمل الخبث. And this is he means like this is also the wording of a hadith, but what he means by this is, if a scholar has put so much contribution to Islam, such as like if the water has become over like 200 liters is kullatain. We talked about this in fiqh, but if it's come over this amount, then if a little bit of najis falls into it, it doesn't have any effect. And the same thing, like when a scholar has put so much into Islam and put so much into like serving the ummah, if he makes a mistake here and there, this doesn't affect the greatness of his contribution to Islam. And so we look at the contribution that they've done, and we see this as beautiful. And if he made a mistake here, we know this is a mistake, and we don't follow him in that. But we also don't hold him or take him to task in that. And so the author here, he says here, وَكُلُّ مَا لَمْ يَرِدْ بِشَأْنِهِ دَلِيلٌ من نقل صحيح صريح أو إجماع منعقد فهو من مسائل الاجتهاد فلا يثرب على المجتهد فيها إن أخطأ إذا كان الحق قصده واجتهد في طلبه. And so he says here that every single thing, that every matter that no blatant, clear-cut, authentic evidence came regarding it, or consensus, then it is from the matters of ijtihad. And this is a good definition of understanding what is from ijtihad and what isn't. And so there's no getting, he says, so there are no getting on scholar's case for making mistake if the truth was his goal and he strove to find it. And so this is a very key, like a way of seeing, is this a matter of ijtihad or not? And so to break apart some of what he says here, that if there's something that no clear dalil has come from the Quran, and what this means by blatant, he says here, it's kind of like that's a blatant, that can only be understood in one way. You can't understand it in multiple ways, but rather it can only be understood in one way. If it is something that is like blatant, clear cut, and it's also authentic. So if it's something that is inauthentic, of course this is not something that is a matter of ijtihad, because it could be, but this is not something that would prove someone else to be wrong. And if it's something that is disagreed upon and its authenticity, then this is also something that's a matter of ijtihad. There's some hadith that are, or many of them, that are disagreed about. Some of them will say, yes, this is something that there's that the hadith is sahih, and some of them will say, no, the hadith is not sahih. Okay, and so this is a difference of opinion. If it's not authentic, without a shadow of a doubt, then this is and also the hadith, if it is authentic, maybe it could be understood in multiple different ways, and so you have to take that into consideration as well. If it's not clear cut all the way, and if it's not blatant in what it means, then this is something that, if it doesn't have all of these conditions, this is something that's from the matters of ijtihad, or if it's consensus. If it's not consensus, then it is also from the matters of ijtihad. If it's not this or that. So this is in the matters that come from ijtihad. There's many different examples of this, but one of them, as I mentioned, maybe this is a hadith that is of the highest levels of authenticity, but at the same time the meaning could be understood in multiple different ways. And so the scholars disagreed, not because the hadith is not, they said this hadith is not sahih, or they all say it's a sahih, but rather some of them, in their understanding of it, they understand it this way, and others understand it this way. And so these examples come up in fiqh a lot, and this is something that when we see these examples of difference of opinion when it come around a certain hadith, then we look at it and we understand where they came from, and as long as they're not going against ijma' and whatnot in this issue, this is something that we understand it's from the areas of ijtihad. And some hadith, such as and there's a hadith that mentions that the Prophet ﷺ, after, or that it talks about like wiping the face after making dua. And so like this wiping the face after dua, most of the scholars in this matter, they will say that this hadith is not sahih. And this is something that, even though there are multiple chains of the narration, they don't ever, like most of the scholars will say this hadith is not sahih. Like when someone prays and then they wipe their face after praying with that, to get the barakah from their dua. And so this is something that the hadith, there is a hadith out there, but it's differed in its authenticity. And there's some people that said, no, the different yes, they're all weak, like the chains are weak, but rather this is something that we put together, and it becomes a evidence when we put together the chains. And the people that have this, because of this is not something that you would say this person is mubtada because they wipe their face after they pray, but rather there's a hadith out there, and there's a hadith that talks about this. And the same thing is like the 15th of Sha'ban. Like there's a hadith out there that some scholars have said that it's a valid hadith, and some of them have said no, it's not valid, which talks about like a certain salah at the night prayer for this. And so some people will say this is something to do, and some people will say no, the hadith is not valid, so it's an act of bid'ah. And of course, like bid'ah is not the same. Like not all bid'ah is innovated equal. Like there's different bid'ah, such as like the bid'ah of the Shia and the bid'ah of the Mu'tazila and whatnot, where they go to very, very vast extremes in the like seeing what their bid'ah constitutes is something that is that goes against serious matters in the religion. And then there's some bid'ah it's something that is very, very light, such as like if someone wipes their face. Like if you are of the opinion that the hadith is not sahih, then this is something that it's debatable whether or not this is something that is bid'ah and whatnot. And of course, leaving it off, there's no harm in leaving this off, because there's no real evidence that points to this besides hadith that is not very sahih, or like taking other hadith, like saying that that Allah is shy to return the person who's praying and supplicating to Allah. Allah is shy for his hands to return empty. When a person puts his hands up to Allah and asks Allah for something, then Allah is shy, yastahi, that the person would bring his hands back to himself empty. And so some of the scholars, they use this as evidence that wiping their face, because the hands aren't empty when he brings back his hands. So wiping his face, this is something. And there's general evidences that people have for that thing. So because of this, we don't put anyone in a hardship, because if you find someone someone that wipes their face and whatnot, we don't say this person is from Ahl al-Bidah and this person is ignorant and whatnot. This is something that you understand that this is a difference of opinion, and this difference of opinion is something that it has evidences, even if it's not clear cut and whatnot. This is something that's from the areas of ijtihad, as well as the salah, the 15th of Sha'ban, and there's other things, and so you kind of have to look and see what is the beginning of this difference of opinion, and does it go to the foundations of the deen, or is it something that goes to that's something that's on the outside? It doesn't have a huge effect on the rest of the deen. And so on this, of course, like when you look at if someone goes against al-Sunnah wal-jamaa'ah in like the way we take our information, this is a serious thing. Like when they don't think that the Quran and the Sunnah in and of itself is a hujjah, they have to have some type of philosophical argument, and then they can bring the Quran and the Sunnah to the table after they've established this philosophical argument. This is something that is a serious bid'ah that goes against the very beginning of the deen, and so and the foundations of the deen. So this is something you deal with in a different way, and so not all bid'ah is innovated equal. And so this is something people need to keep in mind when someone says bid'ah. It's not all at the same level. And the Prophet ﷺ, he says in the hadith that is sahih, that every bid'ah is dolala. And so that he says that every single bid'ah is dolala. And it's narrated that after that, and every dolala is in the hellfire. This last narration, or like addition, وَكُلُّ دُلَالَ فِي النَّارِ, like this is this addition here, this is not something that has come about. A lot of the scholars say this is not a sahih addition to it, but rather the meaning is something that that is understandable though and good. But that every single bid'ah, yes, if it's a bid'ah in the religion, this is something that is bad, and it's all dalala. But there's different levels of dalala. Like there's certain things that are huge, and there's certain things that are minor and that are subject to debate. And so this is something someone should be aware of. And of course, when someone is trying to call people to the Sunnah and to follow Allah and His Messenger, they should understand that the way that they call someone needs to be in accordance to what they're calling to, and that they shouldn't focus on something that's a minor aspect as the biggest issue, when there's something that's an elephant in the room that they haven't dealt with, such as like where are you getting information? Like is philosophy a source of where we take our religion and whatnot, or ilm al-kalam. And so the next thing, the author here, he says, after he talks about that if it doesn't come with with something that is authentic, that is very clear, that can't be taken in any way, then this is from the areas of ijtihad. And also then he also said, وَلَا يُثَرَّبُ عَلَى الْمُجْتَهِدِ فِيهَا إِنْ أَخْطَأَ. And so in this area, you don't get on anyone's case. And he says there's no getting on scholars' cases for making a mistake in this. This is something that we don't get on someone's case and say anything bad about someone for making a mistake. If it's a mistake and it needs to be like, you need to let people know that this is a mistake, okay, then this is something that you can show the truth. And he talks about this afterwards. But you don't get on this scholar's case as an individual. You don't make it anything that's personal for this person. And occasionally people will, when they hear someone disagree with their scholar, and then they think this person's on the scholar's case. And of course this is, no one should be getting on the scholar individually. But if the scholar said something that is incorrect, and then another scholar points to that, this is something they do without getting into that person's, like they don't get on his case and whatnot. And a lot of times from the adab of someone, when they talk about a mistake, is that they don't use the scholar's name that is the one who said this mistake. So they will explain the mistake that is made, and they won't say the scholar's name. They'll say some of the great scholars have said this, and they leave it vague. And then they'll point to the truth with the evidences that they believe is the truth, and they leave it at this. But they don't get on an individual scholar. They don't say Sheikh Fulan, he said this, that, and the other, and this is something that's totally wrong, and this is why, and then he goes against it and whatnot. In this way, this is from the like normally if there's a need for this, because this sheikh in and of himself is a big problem. Say he's like a sheikh of like Sufi or something, and that people should know that this is something that he holds to, so they can be wary of him. This is something, but like in general, if the sheikh brings a lot of good to the table, you don't want to put his name next to the mistake that he made. It's best to bring the mistake, and then if there's a mistake, then you can just explain the mistake and you explain the correct view of it, and you don't need to bring his name into it. And this is something, and if you want to say like a great, some of the great scholars of our time have said this, that, and the other, but this is the correct thing. This is something that the scholars will do out of respect for each other, and this is from their good adab. And may Allah make us of the people of adab, of good etiquette. And so the next thing that he says, and of course this is taking into consideration that the truth was the goal of the scholar, and that he was striving to find it, and this is his goal and intention. Of course, like this person has and he's trying to find the truth, he gets the reward for that, and it's not something that he is a sinner in doing. And then he says the next thing, which is important for us to understand, that he says, but the strange, he says, ولا يعدون من مسائل الاجتهاد ما ورد فيه خلاف شاذ أو جرى مجرى الزلة أو الزلة والهفوة من أقوال العلماء ولا يتابعون عليها ولا يشنع عليهم بسببها. And so he says here that we don't make out the strange, far out differences that come. They're not considered from the issues of ijtihad, or issues which come, or also issues which come from a mistake or the slip of the tongue from the sayings of the scholars. So they're not taken to task over it or treated harshly from this. Or like you would say, so you don't follow them in that mistake. And also you don't follow them in that mistake, and also you don't you don't treat them harshly because of this, or go hard at them about this issue. And so this is something that is also, there's some issues such as that there won't be ijma' in this issue, such as like music. This is something that musical instruments and whatnot. This is something that there is maybe one or two scholars that have said that this is something that's permissible, but their way of looking at this is something that is very, very far removed from everyone, and their evidences for it are very, very, very far removed. It's very far out there, and so we don't take this strange difference of opinion to, like, this doesn't hold any weight. It's not something that makes this, yes, there's khilaf, not all khilaf is equal, like not all difference of opinion is equal, and when the evidence is very, very, very weak and it goes against everybody in this, then this is something that it's pushed to the side, and it's not something that we don't follow any scholar in this. Like if someone asks about this issue of music, you don't take Ibn Hazm's opinion about it, and even the people that say they take Ibn Hazm's opinion about it, Ibn Hazm, he wouldn't approve of what they're doing now in this day and age with the music and whatnot. And so this is not something that you take these differences of opinion that are very far out there and they're strange and whatnot. You don't take this into account. And for ijma' to happen, the majority of the scholars, they say that ijma', for it to be ijma', that it needs to have every single scholar, and not even one person goes against them in that. And some of the scholars said if there's one or two, some of them said if one person goes against the ijma' from the scholar, that he's at the time of like the decision where they look at this, all the scholars are here and there's one scholar here. Some of them say this person is wrong, and then this is actual ijma'. And some people say no, it's not ijma' as long as there's one person that goes against him. This is a difference of opinion. There's also another view where if two people are against everyone, then all this is ijma', and the two people that are against him, then they are going against the ijma' that is there. So there's a difference of opinion between this, and some of the some of the scholars, they will talk about that one person is still going against the sabil al-mu'minin. From his point of view, he's going against the ijma' of everyone else. And so this is a difference of opinion whether one or two people actually affect the ijma'. But if you have one or two people on a strange opinion, they're there's someone who's going against the majority of this, and it's not the fact of the majority only, but it's also looking at some of the evidences of why did the majority go to this point, why did the majority take this certain view, and there's usually reasons between this. And when you look at this, sometimes the scholar either he had a certain understanding that was mistaken, and he didn't look at it with the full view, or some of the evidences didn't come to him, so he came into a mistake here, And some of the other evidence, or some of the other ways of looking at it, is that the person made a mistake, a slip of the tongue, right? Or he wasn't thinking, and he said something that he wasn't thinking. We don't take this, and we don't follow him in this mistake. Also, we don't make it a huge deal against him as well. We don't make this a huge issue against him. We say, "Ghafarallahu lah," like that. May Allah forgive him from that. And this is something that there's no scholar that any person who studies a certain scholar, there will never be a place where they don't find something like this. And of course, people should be very mindful that the scholars are like the fathers of the people of Islam, and so this is something that we should treat them with respect, like our fathers. The fathers in ilm are something that are very important, that we treat them with respect and with honor. And just like if your father ever made a mistake and whatnot, you don't take him to task and say, "Why'd you do this, that, and the other?" That his place in your life is like he's one of the reasons that you're here. So this is something that you need to take that respect, and make sure that respect is with you whenever you look at any of the mistakes that he makes, as well as like any mistakes that the scholars make. Treat them like your fathers, or someone that holds a high rank, and you see it, and you know it's a mistake, so you don't follow that mistake, and you don't make that mistake as something that is good. But if it's something that's a strange difference of opinion, we don't take this and we don't use it as this is an area of khilaf, so we do whatever we want. And this is, some people have done this with music in particular. And of course, people just want to follow whatever they want. They follow their hawa and whatnot. So they will take this and they'll say, "Oh, this is area of this is khilaf. I take this, you take this, we all do our thing, and we don't get on each other's case." No, when it's a weak area of weak khilaf, then this is something that the scholars, they say this does not fall into the khilaf as-sa'igh or mu'tabar, and this is something that it falls into something that you don't follow them in this issue. And so this is something that is very key, because some people will use khilaf as an evidence, and this is something that is very, very it's very, very incorrect for anyone to use khilaf itself as an evidence for why they can do what they can do. Of course, if they're following a scholar, and a scholar that is mu'tabar, or someone who is trustworthy, why not? This is something that they're following. But if they see that scholar made a mistake, and all of the scholars, they say that this is a mistake and whatnot, they should really and check what they're doing, and check themselves with that. And the next thing the author here says, حفظه is, he says, ويعتنون بالتفريق بين مسائل الاجتهاد الذي يسوغ فيها الخلاف ولا يضيق فيها على المخالف وبين المسائل التي لا يسوغ فيها الخلاف. And so he says here that they take care to make a difference between the issues of ijtihad, the ones where difference is acceptable and not attacked, and the ones where no difference is acceptable. So this is very, very keen, and this is something that we should be very mindful of, is that we should be careful to make sure that we understand the difference between the khilaf that is mu'tabar and the khilaf that is not mu'tabar, like the ghayr mu'tabar, the khilaf that is that weak khilaf that we don't look to that. We stick with the jumhur, or with the majority in this issue. And this is something that is key to make this difference, because this difference is the thing that creates harmony in the ummah. When someone understands these differences that are there, and they understand the levels of difference, then this creates harmony with their fellow Muslims. They understand, oh, this is the issue. This person puts his feet next to my feet in salah, and this person, he wants to keep it to where he's comfortable in his salah, and so he doesn't lose his khushu'. And the evidence in there, it's not super clear. yes, it says that the Sahaba used to put their their ka'b to the other person's ka'b, yousri. And so like, okay, they used to do this, but like does this mean that this is something that someone who doesn't do it, their salah is invalid, or that they're a sinner and whatnot? This could be understood in multiple ways. And so we see that this is not something we go on someone else's case if they do this and whatnot, or they prefer this way or this way, and they're following a scholar in this. This is making the difference between here. It creates harmony in the ummah, because people that don't make any difference in here, they say mubtada, and they say like this person is like this person's on a madhab that's ghayr sahih, like that's totally wrong, And so like this is something that someone should be very mindful of how they deal with others, and when they understand the levels of difference of opinion that come in this, they will understand how they're supposed to work with their fellow Muslims, and they can work together with them, and they understand this is the level, this is something we can agree to disagree on, and then we leave it at that, and we go about doing it as we believe is the most proper way, and we do that, and everyone is forgiven in their mistakes as long as they're following or doing what is required of them to do, and asking whether they're a follower, then they ask someone who is reliable and they follow him, or they're the mujtahid and they did their ijtihad. Then everyone gets a reward from that, whether it's one or two rewards. And so this is very key. And of course, the things that come into when someone doesn't take this into consideration, they break apart the ummah, and they cause great fitna within the ummah when they don't realize that these are issues that are not the biggest issues, and they're not like the biggest issues in the book, and it's something that we don't get on each other's case, and also it's under and that we also understand these different levels of how something becomes how something can only take one meaning, or if it can take multiple meanings. And if it can take multiple meanings, then we don't get on the other people's case for that. And so and also making sure that we know the difference between what there is no where khilaf can't come into play. And this is there's the majority of Aqeedah is something that is that there's no khilaf in. And yes, there's minor issues in Aqeedah that there's going to be khilaf, that there will be, and some of the khilaf is stronger than others. Like there's much gradations, but the majority of Aqeedah is something that there's very little khilaf in like the basis of it. And this is something we'll talk about this and it'll come up. But when it comes to some of the other issues, such as like when it comes to the fiqh and rulings and ahkam and whatnot, this is where a lot more khilaf will come into play, and it comes into like the rulings that actually have to do with how we're acting in this way and that way. But these are in general things to keep in mind. And the last thing we'll take today, I know we've gone a little over, but he says ولا تعارض لديهم بين ترك الإنكار والتضييق على المخالف في المسائل الاجتهادية وبين تحقيق العلم لها وبيان ضعف دليل المخالف وتحذير من مذهبه. And so he says here, and that there's no contradiction between them leaving off inkar, which is that strict prohibition. Inkar is like coming up against something when you see something that's wrong and going at it and saying this is wrong, don't do this, and like getting on someone's case and like making sure that they don't ever go back to that. Of course, if you see someone that's like smoking and whatnot, this is something you should tell them that Allah tells you not to kill yourself, and that this is something that we all know that is harming. And also the Prophet ﷺ, he said la darar wa la dirar. And the majority of the ulama, all of them pretty much now, I don't know any scholar these days that would say anything that is other than that's impermissible, and so this is something that, okay, you can get on this person's case with inkar, but if it's another case, then this is like an example of inkar, but there's no contradiction between leaving off inkar and some of the issues of ijtihad, and like sternly refuting the opposition in issues of ijtihad. We leave this off in the areas of ijtihad, and between perfecting and refining the correct view with evidences. So when we have like some of the things we'll talk about in fiqh and whatnot, or maybe they come up in Aqeedah here and there, is that there will be issues where we'll see that there's a more correct opinion here and that, and we show this. We don't leave like the correctness. We don't say, oh, do whatever you want to do this, that, and the other, and no one cares. Rather, but we look for the haqq, like we look for the truth, and wherever that is, this is what we're looking for, and we're trying to get to this, and we'll show this, and also with evidences, and like perfecting the correct view with evidences, coming with all the evidences that we can do, showing the weakness of the opposing views. This is something that's good to do, and warning against following, and like this is something that, of course, the showing the weakness of the opposing views is something that is a part of like making sure that we give the information to the people without hiding the Sharia, or like hiding where we're coming from in this, and making sure that we show this. And this is something, of course, it's done in a polite way, and it's not done in like some type of like harsh way in these issues, but rather we show what the correct view, like according to our understanding and whatnot. Of course, like this is for like the scholars and whatnot, but they show the correct view in the areas of what is proper, and then they show the weakness of the other views. And they show the weakness, and this is also something you'll find the greatest of scholars, and such as like Ibn al-Qayyim, when he'll bring up some of the differences that someone has come up with something, he will bring up these differences in a way that is very, very just for each side. So he'll bring up the argument from the other side, and he brings up all that they have, and he won't necessarily give injustice to the other people's argument. He'll give them all the justice that they do, and then he comes back with the evidences and the evidences and the evidences. And so he shows where they're coming from and gives them the best evidence. Like if you're going to bring up all the evidence to the table, he doesn't throw up the weakest evidence of theirs. And this is sometimes people will do this. They'll take weak evidence from a madhab or something, or from what their counterpart says. They'll bring the weakest of their evidence to the table, and then they'll go against it, and they don't realize that there's something that this other person is holding that is much higher evidence than this. This is like something that is minor in their evidences, but rather there's a bigger evidence. And this is injustice in like and like dealing with these different issues. And so it's something that someone should be mindful to make sure that they're just in their debates. And this is also like debating in and of itself is like an art, or it's something that is a science that Islam has put together, specifically in like areas of qiyas. And this is something that they'll talk about, how do you debate, and what is the adab and the etiquette of how you debate. And of course, all of this is based on that anyone who's debating, their motivation is going to the haqq. It's going to the truth and finding what the truth is. And so like debating is something that both people, they're not trying to show that they're right, but rather they're trying to get to the haqq, and they're trying to bring all of the evidences they have for that from with them, and when they go with someone else at that. And this is something that used to be done, and it was something that like these days there's not like a ton of debates that are done in the same way, but it's something that is as an actual art form, how they let people speak, how they listen to it, and how they come and turn back at times when they don't speak in a certain way. They'll leave something off. This is a whole like science that the scholars have put different levels of how they work in this area of difference and whatnot. And of course, all of this is with respect, and making sure that it's done in a very that's done in a way of going towards the truth, and it's not about someone puffing themselves up saying I'm the smartest guy in the book, but rather it's something that is done in a certain way where everyone is seeking the truth. And then the last thing that he says here was tahdir min madhabi, and this is something that he says in like warning against following it. And of course, like the warning is something that should be taken as that. Like this is not something, if someone is following an issue in ijtihad, then this person that's following it, they shouldn't be given inkar. Like it shouldn't come to the level of inkar about this, because this isn't something that's munkar. But rather this is something that is like it should be on the like ala sabil al-nasiha. Like it should be in the way of giving nasiha or good advice to somebody, but not necessarily coming upon them as if they're doing something that's terrible or that's doing something wrong and whatnot. Maybe warning is not the best word, but wallahu ta'ala a'lam. وصلى الله وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين.
فلذلك فادع واستقم كما أمرت ولا تتبع أهواءهم وقل آمنت بما أنزل الله من كتاب وأمرت لأعدل بينكم الله ربنا وربكم لنا أعمالنا ولكم أعمالكم لا حجة بيننا وبينكم الله يجمع بيننا وإليه المصير.